Well, welcome everybody. In the midst of a very full day of lots of activities, this actually is one of our normal routine of a brown bag lunch program. But we're kind of keeping in the theme of the day related to our campus master plan, a lot of community engagement opportunities, a lot of opportunities for you all to provide your feedback on this process as the museum works on creating a vision for the next 2, 5, 10, 20, 40 years. My name is Tova Brandt. I'm the executive director of the museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this brown bag lunch. And to introduce our guest speaker today, Brett Seelman of Seelman Landscape Architecture. Seelman Landscape Architecture is kind of the driving force behind the museum's current campus master planning process, and through Brett's conversation, you'll understand a lot of the reasons why his team is a really great fit for the Museum of Danish America in this process, and kind of bringing these conversations to light. So with that, I'll raise the microphone again up for Brett.
Thank you, Tova. How's everyone doing today?
Great.
We are grateful that you all are here, and hopefully you'll find reasons to linger a little bit longer this afternoon. So really grateful for the museum to host us today and for the community for all your input. So I was asked to speak a little bit on my journey in landscape architecture. Hint, it does involve a stop in Denmark, which is probably another reason why I'm here. I am, as Tova said, my name is Brett Seelman. I own Seelman Landscape Architecture. We're a studio that's based in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. With me today, I have Alex Priest. He's an associate in my office. He is based in Chicago, and Ali Shaima, who's a designer based in Colorado. We are a Midwest-based firm. We take on projects all over the country with a focus on Midwest projects. I also want to give a shout out to Jens Jensen, who's introduced us to the museum and is an integral part of this team as well. So I tend to be informal. I share a lot of stories. So if you have any questions or anything along the way, please feel free to jump in and ask them. And I'm going to start sort of with a quick background about myself. I grew up on a Century family farm outside of Iowa City, Iowa. My parents were general contractors and farmers. And I can't think of two things that take up as much of your time as possible than someone that's in the construction business and also in farming. But that was my playground. I grew up on my parents' job sites. I grew up taking care of cattle, horses, in 4-H, and it really shaped my love for the outdoors. I was one of those kids that loved being outdoors, but I also loved science and I loved math. And somewhere along the line, someone said you should look into landscape architecture, and I'm really glad I did. But I also have to put this in, that when you grow up on a farm, and when you grow up with parents that are contractors, you don't go anywhere. During the summertime is the busiest time of the year, and you do not go on vacation. So for the first 18 years of my life, we took a yearly voyage to the big city of Des Moines and went to Adventureland in the Iowa State Fair. And that's the only place I traveled for the first 18 years of my life. So when I got to college, I kind of went crazy in a good way. I got the travel bug and I took advantage of that. So little detour here. So I'm envious of the people in this room that can proudly claim that they're 100% Danish or 100% anything. Unfortunately, at my generation, it's rare if someone's 100% anything. I am mostly English and German. You can see some of the other things that I am. I'm about 10% Scandinavian, about 6% Norwegian, I'm about 2% Danish, and I'm about 1% Swedish. Now, I'm also very into ancestry and genealogy. This is one DNA's output. There's multiple tests. If I show you my DNA from another company, the ratios are different. Some don't show up at all. And that's based off of the different populations that are taking their test. Europeans use a different DNA platform than Americans use. And so there's different metrics and haplogroups that are become trends in this space. What's really interesting to me is most people get into ancestry or an interest in ancestry through their paternal last name. And what I have found is that your maternal side, your mother's side, really becomes the unknown, where you really can learn so much more about who you are. And in this case, I have a maternal third great grandmother who is 100% Danish. And you can see in just 4 generations how it gets to 2%. It's amazing. They say that each generation you receive approximately 50% of your DNA from your parents. Now, your DNA is very similar to your siblings, but they can have their own ratios of what they're pulling from different ancestors. So by the time I get to my second great grandparent, I'm at 50% Danish. My great grandparent, 12.5, 6.25 for a grandparent. My parents are around 3%, and then here I am at around 1 to 2%. Now, I'm gonna hold on to that and milk it for as much as I can. But I think we all have stories. We all have, for those of us that aren't 100% of something, the makeup of who we are is, it's more than just our paternal last name, and that's always really interested me. And so, although I grew up in Eastern Iowa, I went to Iowa State University. My grandfather always said, if you want an education, if you want to party, go to Iowa. If you want an education, go to Iowa State. I think we did both at Iowa State, but I chose Iowa State because it had a landscape architecture program, and like I said, I loved math, I loved science, I loved art, and I loved being in the outdoors, and it was sort of this really great natural fit for me to find landscape architecture. I get there. Again, never vacationed beyond Adventureland or the State Fair, and when you get accepted into the design program in landscape architecture at Iowa State, they say, buckle up, we're taking you on a journey down the Mississippi River. And so we went on this program called Savannah Studio. We traveled from the boundary waters of Canada down to Big Bend National Park in Texas, and this trip changed my life. It opened up my eyes to America and the middle part of America. And a side story with this is, and Alex was part of my class, we didn't know each other. You're 2 weeks into class and you're doing CPR training, what to do if a bear attacks you. And then they're like, all right, load up the vans, we're going to Canada. And you had to really learn how to experience these places with other people that you didn't know, get along. Like the social component of what we learned, I think, was almost as valuable as the different types of landscapes that we saw. We had the chance, it was very deliberate, to go to very natural landscapes, to make stops in places like Minneapolis and Chicago and Dallas, where we could get a sense of more urban design types of landscape architecture. And it was one of the most incredible trips. And we were gone total for about 9 weeks. And it changes your life when you hug the Mississippi River and you learn from that landscape, and you study families of trees that live in Texas that also live in the middle of the country. Just was an eye-opening trip for me, and really encouraged me to get out of Iowa and start to explore, start to see what this country has to offer. We would have these assignments along the way. So this is a photo of outside of Devil's Lake. This is Parfrey's Glen in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And we would be given these little assignments. We want you to do a photo montage collage. That's what you see here. We had a sketchbook with us at all times. This was studying different types of erosion at Enchanted Rock in Texas, where the goal was to see the landscape for its history, see the landscape from a geology standpoint, from a cultural, historical standpoint. It's a really great learning opportunity to learn about all different types of landscape architecture and landscape. Here's a sketch from La Mission de San Jose in Mexico, where you see a plan view and a superimposed axion of the church with some details. And we would go to these places and just be with them, sit down and be in these places for 4 hours all day, a week at a time sometime, and really get to experience the place. Here's an image, a sketch from Big Bend National Park in Mexico. And Alex could probably attest to this as well. It just opened your eyes differently, especially if you were from a small town in Iowa, grew up on a farm. It opened my eyes to the world in a really beautiful way. Another fun thing that happened at Iowa State was we had a research assistant who said, hey, Brett, I think you'd be a good fit to design stormwater gardens. And I said, why not? I loved math. I loved doing sort of the calculations required to determine how big these should be and the depth of the soil profile. But another thing that I was assigned to was doing urban herpetology research, which I'm not sure if Warren would know what this is, because I know he had mentioned his study of frogs, but basically I used this technology to capture the breeding season of different frogs and amphibians. And frogs and amphibians are usually the earliest indicators in any ecosystem of the health of that ecosystem. So if there's deformities with amphibians or frogs, it's showing a bigger sign that's either present or yet to expose itself. But here I was, and when you're in a swamp and when you're collecting and listening to frog mating, and it sort of changed my respect for ecology at a really, really small level, but made me think about this from a bigger scale. And I think that that's something that I really respected about the profession of landscape architecture. It really shows you how to see the world, shows you how to think big, and it was like kind of a really great fit for how my mind works. You know, it's you're thinking about urban planning, but you're also thinking about the frog that's going to be in that landscape, and there's some beauty to that. And then the beautiful recession of that 2007, 2008, 2009 time period. At Iowa State, it is a 5-year program, and they kick you out basically your 4th year, and they want you to go study at a different university. They want you to get a job, or they want you to get an internship. And I tried so hard to get a job, to get an internship. I really wanted to be that kid that stayed in Iowa and that was going to graduate and work for the big landscape architecture firms in Des Moines. No one was hiring. You could not find a job. If you called the biggest firms in the biggest cities, they were offering that you could work for free. And probably have had too much coffee at this point, and Alex and another classmate of ours probably looked at this much differently than I, who was trying to find a job. They said, we're going to study abroad. And I was like, that is really smart. When you can't find a job, go study abroad in Europe. So Alex went to Amsterdam, our friend Kelly went to Sweden, and I was in conversations with a professor, and they're like, you should look into the Royal Danish Academy School of Architecture. And I was like, what is that? What is that? I want to learn more. And I applied. I got in. This is dated December 10th, 2009. My semester was going to start February 1, 2010. Our school semester ended about the first week of December, and so my intent was to fly to Copenhagen right before Christmas and stay there through the summer of 2010. And about 2 weeks before my flight, I get this email from Michael van Valkenburg, who is one of the leading practitioners in landscape architecture in this country. And Michael is really short, he has a lot of humor, and he's very direct, and I love that about him, and he was an incredible mentor for me. But I get this email, he did not know who I was, but he had a really strong connection with Iowa State, and I think he was talking to some professors about who might be a good fit for an intern in their office. And so I get this random email 2 weeks before I'm supposed to board a plane to Copenhagen, and it says, Brett, if you are interested in an internship at my office, please tell me a little bit about yourself and your work. And I think to myself, you gotta be kidding me. And I think part of that hardship was I wanted to do both. Like I knew the value of a job during the recession, and here I am being offered an internship from a leading practitioner in the profession, but I also really wanted to go to Copenhagen. And so I went into the chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture and I said, I cannot make this decision. I don't know what to do. And he said, you should do both. And I said, both. He said, defer admission, go to New York, and then go to Copenhagen and finish your degree in Copenhagen. And I said, okay, let's go. So I deferred admission. I have to be honest, I didn't even know what the word deferred meant. I had to look it up. And I'm like, how does this even work? I deferred admission, and then I got accepted for their following program. So I started in September. I was in New York for 8 months. I started September 1, 2010, and then their semester goes through the first part of the spring. And I just have to say that I'm really grateful that I went to New York before Copenhagen, and I'll touch a little bit on that in a little bit. So I went to New York. Here's a photo. I worked for Michael Van Valkenburg Associates. If you're not familiar with them, look them up. They're doing some of the most incredible work in the country. I worked in their Brooklyn, New York office. I got there in winter. Here's a photo outside of our office. These are all the footprints in the snow from people stepping on a fresh dusting of snow in New York. Very big contrast to growing up on a farm and on a job site in Iowa. But I loved it. There's a lot of energy in New York. The first day that I got there, I was asked to construct a model for a project outside of Chicago, right by Millennium Park. And so I dove into that. And so I would build a lot of models, be a part of a lot of the design teams and the representations. We deal a lot with topography, a lot with water collection and storage. And Michael Van Valkenburg is known for his beautiful use of plants. He's a plantsman first. And so when you marry plants and design, beautiful things happen. And I learned a lot through this internship. Here's this model of this park in Chicago. At the time in the office, it was called North Grant Park, and it's now been renamed to Maggie Daley Park, and it's a really beloved park in Chicago. We took this little smaller scale study model. This is probably 4 foot wide by 4 foot wide, and we made it an 8 scale model. So this is about 16 feet wide by 8 feet wide. And when a client can stand around a model and see themselves in the park at this scale, it is an incredible communication tool. And I loved being a part of this part of the process and understanding the power of iteration and the power of study through model making. And I got tired of New York after a while. It was, I loved the energy. I was working way too much, but I learned a lot. And my now wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, we wanted to go on a little trip before I flew to Denmark. And I said, let's drive to Rocky Mountain National Park. And guess what's on the way from Cedar Rapids, Iowa to Rocky Mountain National Park? Elkhorn, Iowa. So in summer of 2029 was my first time here at the museum. There was no green roof, there was no prairie, there was no entrance plaza. I came in specifically to buy a customs book. I wanted to sort of better understand just the Danish culture. And so I came to the bookstore and I got my customs book, and then we headed off to Colorado for the summer. There's a picture of my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. Her name's Erica. We were just young, we were in love, we wanted to get out of the city. And it was just a great chance for us to kind of bridge that gap of time and spend some time together before I flew to Copenhagen. I have to get my phone out to check my time because I tend to talk a lot. Okay, so I arrive in Denmark. I, again, studied at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, School of Architecture. I studied in Department 1, which was called Architecture, City, and Landscape. They changed the name of the school and the departments frequently. At the time, there was 11 departments of architecture that you could choose from, and I think the name has also been changed since then, but it was an incredible experience. Here's a photo of the front door into my apartment building.
Were they teaching in Danish?
There was, I'll get to that. That's a good question.
Yeah.
So the Royal Danish Academy was founded in 1754. The School of Architecture was originally named the Royal Danish Painting, Sculpture, and Building Academy of Copenhagen, and was offered as a gift to King Frederick V on the occasion of his 31st birthday. Notable alumni include Oliver Ellison, Ozzer Horn, Jan Gill, Heppe Hein, George Jensen, Bjarke Ingels, Christian Hansen, Arne Jacobsen, Werner Panton, Finn Jewell, and Henning Larsen, just to name a few. Really incredible list of architects and designers and artists that came out of the program, and I was inspired by that. It was just an incredible environment to be in. Here's some, again, I mentioned, this is the photo of my front door and my bike, my French Peugeot bike that I got my first day of Copenhagen, my first day there, because I realized how expensive public transit is. They intentionally make public transit expensive so you go buy a bike. And I learned that really quickly when I was spending like $12 just to get from Frederiksborg, where I lived, to the school. And I'm like, oh yeah, I should just go buy a bike for $200, 800 kroner. Here's the academy was at an old naval base that had been converted to the School of Architecture. My flat was in Frederiksborg, Danisplads 10. This was a beautiful bike to school every day. This is the King's Garden right here. I would hug the canal, go past the King's Garden, and over into Christianshavn, into where the academy was. And these old naval buildings converted into a School of Architecture was just a beautiful playground for design. It was so just incredible of a space to be in. And it had a lot of contrast from New York City. This is the canteen. This is where we would have our lunches. Also, every Friday, there was a free dog bar where we'd have 35 kroner beers, which were incredible. Here's a winter shot. We all biked, no matter what the weather conditions were. You can get a glimpse of how beautiful the buildings were. And I knew that I was not an American anymore from the first day. I get there, and the Royal Danish Nightingale String Quartet is performing for the opening ceremony of the school. They have aquavit, wine, smorgasbord, and I'm like, I'm not even of legal drinking age. I would be locked up in America for this, and here I am with my bike on this beautiful campus, listening to the Royal String Quartet while I'm drinking wine, and this is day number 1. This is amazing. And it only continued to get better. So I have some friends, my sister's in this group. I think Alex mentioned this to me, that everyone has a different experience for study abroad. Mine was very focused on architecture. They had a really strong program, but we also partied. So this wasn't like a program where you just go to Europe and party all the time. This was a really focused school where you were to be inspired, and that happened. Here's a class list. It is hard to probably read for most of you. In Department 1, I was the only American. For those closer, you can see that this is 95% all Danes. We did have 2 females from France and 1 gentleman from Spain that was in my cohort. I was the only American. There was probably about 3 Americans studying at the program in the different departments, and that was really fun to be part of the foreign exchange group, but then also to be in my classes every day were mostly Danish people. And so I got to see both sides of the Danish culture, because everyone around me most of the day was Danish. But when we would do like foreign exchange activities, I could be with a bunch of people from all over the world. And we transitioned to day number 2, and the department says, we're gonna host a party, a dinner. We're gonna all make dinner together after opening day, and we're gonna light the candles, we're gonna turn the lights off, and we're going to socialize. And this just has set the tone for the rest of my life. That Danish concept to slow down, to light a candle, to share a drink and share a conversation with someone is still a part of who I am and how I have run our staff office. During school, we would have religiously, we would take a coffee or a tea at 11, and we would take a coffee and tea at noon, or at 2 o'clock, every single day. no matter how busy we were. It was the most incredible thing to be a part of that culturally. And again, a huge contrast to working 100 hours a week in New York City. Our campus was right off of the harbor, not a bad view to bike through every day. And we dove in really early to material studies. We built a lot of models. We experimented a lot with clay and negative space and form and sculpture. We studied a lot of materiality, so bricks and masonry and concrete work and concrete formwork. Bjarke Ingels at the time, big as the big Danish design firm, was really a young firm at this time, and they were experimenting with materiality a lot. And I think that these little exercises were a way for us to get into that as well, that a concrete wall can be more than just a straight concrete wall. And when you have to actually build these things and make them and design them, you learn about the process, and by learning through the process, you learn what the opportunities are. And time goes on, a couple weeks go on, and they said, well, we want you to go travel to a Danish woodland and study succession of the woodland. So we went to Telsvidaheim in North Zealand, and I've never been so blown away by a woodland that was both managed for forestry and a public park and a landscape. It was just an incredible experience. I do have to say, these are all photographs from me, from my flash drives, which was an emotional experience to turn back time for the last 16 years to go and find these images, because they've remained for the last 16 years as a memory for me. And to go look at these images again, it was emotional for me, because they took me right back to this landscape. Part of being an architecture student is to sort of be able to compose an image, tell a story, see that little shadow of light and be able to capture it. And so that's what you try to do, right? And these images really not only capture Telsvidaheim, but just a way to tell a story through imagery. And we got back to the school and we started to learn really about forest management and planting and the succession of a forest and the density and the clearing over time, the changes of color over time, and would go through all of these little exercises where we start to really learn from a working forest. And then they said, we're gonna go on an excursion. And I'm like, this is amazing. One field trip after the next. So we are presented with the excursion itinerary. We end up stopping at all of these places around Denmark. Becomes a tour of the country. We were gone for a little over a week, and we just drove around and camped and stayed at these little Airbnb types of places, and we got a chance to explore the entire country of Denmark. And sharing some images from that here. You could really see the folk trends that you would see in some of the old churches we would stop by. See a lot of these old, beautiful architectural gems. You're gonna see in my slides, like, in a way, inside the mind of a landscape architect, where I'm looking at something from like the scale of a paver all the way into, is this street laid out the right way, or does this make sense how to get here? We got to tour the beautiful Danish countryside, old working blacksmith shops. Wow. Geez, this looks like a place I kind of know. Looking back at these images and then hearing about the story of building the museum here, you get it. This rolling agricultural landscape does remind me. Elkhorn and Denmark look very similar, and we've had a chance to stay in Harlan. We've ate in Audubon, and you drive through these old ridge lines that these roads were laid out on, and you get these little moments, and you could see why the Danish immigrants wanted to settle here. Our last stop was Mons Klint, which is a really powerful landscape. It's just an incredible bluff landscape that released a bunch of Danes and one American on, and take off your shoes and stay a while. It was just an incredible space to be in. Very different from most of the beaches here in America, in that you are in the landscape and the landscape towers above you. Was one of the most memorable stops along our trip. We also stopped at Louisiana. This was an incredible, the experience of Louisiana reminds me a bit of a journey to Elkhorn, perhaps from Des Moines or Omaha. You got to drive outside of the city and experience that journey. And it was really incredible to take the train from Copenhagen to Louisiana. I was Azerhorn's art piece. This is called Dead Drunken Danes. I probably had a little bit too much aquavit the night before, but I stared at this for probably 30 minutes. I was captivated by it, but I was captivated more so by just Danish modernism and respecting the historic and the contemporary, and I think some of his work really plays into that. We went, to Roskilde, saw a lot of the old churches and architecture, saw this beautiful Porsche in Roskilde. You see some incredible cars in Europe. I'm jealous. And then we get back to the school and they say, book a flight, we're going to the Architecture Biennial in Venice. So I'm in October and I haven't sat down at a desk yet. I have, but it hasn't been very much time sitting on a computer. They wanted to teach through exploration and learn by doing and learn by seeing. And so we all booked a flight from Copenhagen to Milan, and we all trained from Milan to Venetia, and I sat down at a table with all these Danes when we got in and had, the full Italian meal, stayed at this little villa. The next morning we woke up, and I've never had this feeling before. I was the foreign exchange student in a foreign country with Danish people, and they were very upset. They could not believe how much sugar the Italians eat for breakfast. And so when we woke up and the villa had prepared breakfast, it was all of these pastries. Now Danes know their pastries, okay? I'm not discounting that. But they also like a little bit of muesli, they like a little bit of fruit, and the people of my generation in Denmark, they want something that has some substance. And they were very upset. I'm like, this is a bizarre feeling, like watching all of my classmates get upset from a cultural perspective, like Danes versus Italians. I'm like, this is amazing. I'm just gonna sit back and listen to all of this. But we spent a week in Venice and had a couple of exercises, which I'll get to, but the main goal was to go to the Architecture Biennial, be inspired by the Biennial. But they also threw in this exercise, it was called Get Lost, and we took a boat around the island and they dropped us off in pairs of 2, and the goal was to meet back in Piazza San Marco. And the goal was to get lost. And along the way, stop, see, document, learn from the Venice streets and landscape. So this was our different routes that we all ended up mapping and taking. We stopped at different places along the way. These are some images of mine from that walk. I really was inspired by the different thresholds, like how narrow a street could become in Italy that serves all of its functions, knowing that the canals provide a lot of their industry in terms of how food and service gets to these places, but just the flow of people and traffic through these really, really tiny streets was just beautiful. Here's some images from the Biennial. Here's a project where the artist wanted you to experience what it was like to be up in a cloud, which is really interesting. There's a lot of architectural models that you could see and explore and just learn from as a young architecture student. And then when we got back to Copenhagen, we mapped a lot of our photographs and our routes on a composite plan and had an exhibition to showcase the photography of a theme that we were celebrating. My theme was thresholds and sort of the narrowness and entry points into different streetscapes. Other people chose, Italian fruit statuary. But it was a way for us all to sort of exhibit what we saw and how we saw it in a collective way. And then we got back to Copenhagen and they said, we're going to Sweden. We're going to go to a design workshop in Sweden. So we all took the train to Sweden and we went to this 3-day workshop with Scandinavian architecture students from across the country, or across the world. It was mostly Scandinavia, Norway, and Sweden. And we participated in an urban design charrette. This is one of my favorite trips from that trip to Sweden, just this beautiful weeping beach that's been clipped, and sort of the motion of the people and the traffic. I love this, landscape architects geek out over certain trees, so beech is one of my favorite trees. And then our main project was designing a new Central Park south of Copenhagen. It's called Amalfeld, and that became like really the core. Once we got back in November, became the core of our focus to dive into that project. Here's this whole area, so directly south of Copenhagen, is considered Amalfeld, which was it was an urban design project to design parks, design expansion of the city, kind of a full-scale urban design program. And I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna boot away. And then I just wanted to share some other adventures that I had in Scandinavia. A couple of friends of mine, we took the ferry from Copenhagen to Oslo, which is something I would recommend that you do if you do go over there. You depart Copenhagen in the evening around 6 p.m. and then you wake up in the Norwegian fjords and then port right by the new Oslo Opera House by Snoetta. And this building architecturally is a gem that you should all be aware of. It just tapers directly into the water. Here's a young version of myself. That is the Norwegian flag, I know. But some buddies and I on the ferry, and then in some of the parks there. I went from being a greaser in New York with a pompadour to a European young hippie really quickly. There I am, oh my goodness. And I ended this Danish part with some images. I was told specifically and individually, they said, if a Danish person invites you into their home, that means they trust you and they want a friendship with you. And I was really honored to have predominantly Danish classmates that welcomed me into their home. They were incredible. Most of the classes were in Danish, but there's a lot of cognates in the Danish language. You saw the landscape excursion. I could really follow along. I presented in English, but most of my Danish classmates presented in Danish, and most of the lectures were in Danish as well. But these moments where you strip out all the fanciness that life can be, and it's just a deck of cards, a beer, good lighting, good Danish lighting, a bunch of young Danes, and these are some of my favorite memories from this trip, and people that I still stay in touch with, people that were in my wedding, and it's just been sort of an incredible family that's been created from studying in Denmark. A lot of these people own their own small young firms in Copenhagen, so it's been really incredible to just both kind of grow up together in this profession. Smorgasbord, you can't have a party without smorgasbord. I went to this party, and these are my classmates, we knew each other very well, and it was probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I thought the party was tapering down. And one of my classmates opens up this drawer, and it was the Royal Copenhagen new coffee mug at the time with the insulated side and no handles that are like $40 a piece. And he just had a drawer of 30 of them lined up like soldiers. 3 o'clock in the morning, coffee time. It was amazing. It was like, all right, here we go. just some of, conversation was just incredible. This is one of my, this is Jens. He's one of my really good friends that was in my wedding. Jens Andersen. He owns his own firm now in Copenhagen. Here I am wearing a Henrik Vibsko scarf. Like the Danes totally influenced me in all respects. And even my computer case, which I still take to business meetings, is Danish. And I don't care if it's a little bit fun. I'm a little bit fun. We're not dead yet, right? We don't need to carry on black suitcases all the time or briefcases. But the Danish culture really, it made me slow down. And I think if I never went to Denmark, if I would have said I'm only going to go to New York, I think I would be this arrogant, rude, tired person all the time. And by going to Denmark, it showed me that life did not have to be go, go, go. I didn't have to be in an hour-and-a-half commute every day. You can take your bike. Now that's a whole other project that I didn't even talk about, was I had to make a documentary about the biking community of Denmark. And it really made me slow down, and that slowdown still exists to this day. When my staff is with me, we take moments of pause. We have coffee breaks. We get away from our desk and we enjoy a conversation with each other at a restaurant. Or I had this small, I call it the den in our office, and it's all Danish furniture. It's Hans Wagner and Ib Kovard Larsen. And, I think that comes by way of being interested in design and loving Danish. But that has been really important to me, that we don't have to be go, go, go all the time. And it's important to slow down in our lives and to share that conversation with someone. And befriending Danes highlighted that. Now, what's really interesting, and if you've been to Denmark, you know that it's 90% Danish, and the other 10% are Middle Eastern. And so the food you drink after, or the food you eat after a long night out is shawarma, is like Middle Eastern food. I had to throw this in here just because it was something that happened quite a bit. Now, I spoke a little bit earlier about my paternal last name, Seelman. It's German. My family has a brewery in Germany that's been in the family since 1608. And here I am with my cousin Joscha Seelman, who actually studied in Iowa, and I got to know in Iowa. We share a third great grandfather. And the very similar story, 1800s, one brother got everything and the other brother came to America. And so my third great grandfather, Conrad Seelman, came to America and settled in Iowa. And Joscha and I got to know each other while he was studying in the States. And so when I went over there, Copenhagen being really close to Germany, I spent the first part of my Christmas holiday in my ancestral paternal family land in Zetmansdorf, Germany, with my cousin Joscha drinking the Seelman beer, which was pretty incredible. And then I rushed back to Copenhagen because my wife, or my now wife, had flown to Copenhagen. And I met her at the train station. We spent a week in Copenhagen. I then took her on that ferry ride back to Oslo. We spent Christmas in Oslo, and then we spent New Year's in London. And it was a really incredible 2 weeks to just reconnect again and have her meet all of my Danish friends and see my Danish school. And one thing that at Christmas time in Denmark and at the Royal Danish Academy, they have huge parties. And I don't mean drink a lot. They decorate a lot. As architecture students, it's each architecture department competed for who could create the most magical winter wonderland. And then you go around to the different departments and you celebrate the Christmas season. And it was so fun bringing my girlfriend into that and having her meet all of my classmates and have them welcome her. And the first thing she said after being in Copenhagen for an hour, she said, "I feel safe here." And I thought, that's a really good way to define Scandinavia. It's you feel safe in Scandinavia. And that, when your significant other says that, it's a beautiful thing. It's okay, she can relax. And it was a really incredible trip. My classmates, like I said, welcomed her. And let's see what else I have here. Sorry, I'm really long-winded. So I get back, finish my degree, and I have about 5 more minutes here. While I was in Copenhagen, Michael Van Valkenburg reached back out and said, we'd like to offer you a full-time job. You can choose Cambridge or New York. And I loved New York and I loved the energy of New York, but I also knew that I couldn't see myself there long-term. And so I chose our Boston Cambridge office. And here's that photo from that photo of that model from Maggie Daley Park that then became a built park in 2013. There's this beautiful ice ribbon component to it where they freeze the ice ribbon over and generates a lot of money, creates a lot of spur for the city. This is the George Bush Presidential Library in Dallas, Texas. Another one of my first assignments was to go down to Dallas and tag trees for the Presidential Library and lay out trees and plants on site. Have a construction administration role. This is a 15-acre native Texas prairie that was established on site and met all the other programming needs needed for a presidential library. Also did a lot of work for Harvard. This is a student center where we designed these green walls. Worked on some restoration efforts. There was a big push to have all of their housing projects up to ADA code. So we redesigned courtyards and plazas to accommodate current accessibility standards. Worked on the US Embassy in Mexico City. A lot of museum types of space. This is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. This is a residential property in upstate New York. Does anyone recognize what they're looking at here? This is a Hepe Hine art piece with mirrors. And there was a lot of meadow and prairie and stream restoration that occurred on these larger properties as well. My largest project that I worked on was what's called the 606. This is a 3-mile elevated old rail line in Chicago that's been converted to a park. And then I like to say that Seelman Landscape Architecture was born from a storm. When my wife and I first moved back from Boston, I took a job at the University of Iowa. I oversaw about $150 million worth of architectural engineering and landscape projects. Was driving to Iowa City every day from Cedar Rapids, and on the 10th of August 2020, a storm rolled through, and I was sort of sick of driving to Iowa City every day, watching people in my community pick up, knowing that they needed landscape architects to help restore, and that's when I started the firm. And this is a photo from my property. We lost over 100 trees on our property. Just the whole place looks like pixie sticks. My property's just like everyone else's in town, whether you lived on a 1-acre lot and lost your 2 big oak trees, or whether you lived on a large acreage and lost 100 trees. This eastern Iowa suffered that day, and we're still reaping the loss of the almost 70% of canopy that we lost from the storm. I was called to start my own firm. I did not want to take a back seat to watch people restore. And just driving down First Avenue, thinking to myself, if I were to start a firm, what type of project would I want? And I just drove right past Bruce Moore, one of my favorite landscapes when I lived on this side of town. And I said, that's the type of project that I would want. It's historical, it's cultural, it's a public amenity, it's a large scale where there's a woodland and there's lawn and there's orchard. It played a lot of those pieces. And this became one of the earliest projects in the office. And it's led to other work with Jens at a large property outside of Chicago, a 600-acre estate where we just planted a formal garden with all native perennials, 5,000 native perennials. And the firm focuses on cultural and institutional work. A lot of our clients are for universities. We ended up teaming up with Michael Van Valkenburg on a 140-acre riverfront master plan in Cedar Rapids. And so we like to be a part of projects where we're for the public good, we're for the historical good. The biggest joy that I get is watching people enjoy the landscapes that you create. That's the biggest reward. And there's been some terms about intergenerational and multi-generational. That's the power of the landscape. We all can use them. We can all use the landscape. We can all be in the landscape, picnic in the landscape. And gardens and parks are really the common ground and why I do what I do. I had to end with this. This is my now wife. She stuck with me through New York and Copenhagen, and we have 2 beautiful boys. We have Henrik, who's going to be 9 here pretty soon, and then Leo, who is 8 years old. And they keep me busy between the firm and my children. That's my new life now, and I love it. It's been incredible, and we're very grateful to be here to envision the next generation of Moda, and I appreciate all of your time here today. So thank you. Tusen tak.
So you went from your large-scale home growing up, farm and big equipment, and then your experience in Scandinavia, which is a pretty small, fairly small country, lots of water, and so did you go over there and go, were you like constantly talking about, well, I come from this place where you can see for miles and never, or maybe this was before all the windmills, but I mean, how did that kind of shape you and where merged where you are now?
That's a great question. So first of all, to respond to a piece of that, I learned really quickly culturally that, like most Americans, we can't just blurt out whatever we want whenever we want to. So like, not only from the cultural perspective, Danes are very deliberate in what they say and how they say it, and I might not have come off that way today, but I definitely learned that from living in Denmark, that you choose your words wisely, and there's a different type of humor there. And so for me, the biggest contrast was not from Iowa to Denmark, but it was from New York City to Copenhagen, because both very urban, big cities in the context of the world that we live in, but culturally very different. I found that from that Savannah studio, traveling down the Mississippi River with 40 strangers that become your friends, you have to be adaptable. That we are here first to be human beings. You have to still do human things. You have to eat. You have to use the restroom. You all of these things to just be a human being. But you can also choose, like, are you that New York Minute type of person where everyone needs to know your business and carries all your stress? Or can can things be a little bit slower? So for me, like, the landscape didn't impact me as much as the cultural side of things. And a part of that might have been is just traveling a lot after I left Iowa and just saw all different types of landscapes across the world.
Yeah, it's sort of a general question. So when you're planning landscape for, I guess what you call planned experience, how do you avoid the possibility of becoming too programmatic?
Well, I think one thing that we talk about a lot in landscape architecture is what's called the genus loci, which means, it's Latin, it means the spirit of the place. And we would be a disservice through this process if we start to plug and play all of these different types of ideas in the prairie, right? We ruin the essence of the prairie. And so that's part of the reason why we're here today, is to sort through different ideas that the community has, that we have, to make sure that we are honoring the prairie, that we're not Chuck E. Cheesing or adventure landing the prairie, if you will. And that's our job, right? And I think that's what differentiates a really good landscape architect from someone that's just checking the box. Oh, well, we heard that there needs to be a replica ice cream cone in the prairie. Look, it's really our job to prepare a plan that celebrates the genus loci of the place. Any other questions? We have probably time for one more question if anyone has one. Thank you all for being here today. I know Jens is going to lead a prairie walk next. It is a little bit windy, so if you have a hat or a hood, I would recommend it. And if you have any questions, feel free to grab me or Alex or Allie, and we'd love to tell you more about what we do and the projects we take on, or about the master plan. So, Rich.
I'd like to know, how do you and Jens interact on this project?
Yeah, so I can probably give you an example based off of a built work that we've done. And Jens Roy Diblick wrote this the other day that, Jens is an ecologist, and he'll be the first to say this. He's not saying I am the protege of my ancestor and I am the landscape architect. He is focusing on ecology. He's focusing on predominantly the ground plane and native plants. Is that correct, Jens? And so, from a landscape architecture perspective, we collaborate on projects. We're looking at the big picture. We're looking at entryways and gateways and typologies of landscapes, and is there enough signage? How are we going to expand from a facility footprint? And so it's a collaboration of two worlds, of ecology and landscape and architecture and planning. And that's what we've done at our project outside of Chicago. A lot of times we're at the 30,000 foot view, and Jens helps us land it into, like, these are the specific types of plants that should go in here for the types of soil and what's best for the environment.
Yeah, it also adds just like, you know, in my career, Brett would probably agree with this, is just, you know, collaboration is something that I think we can all thrive on, because we all see the site like a little bit differently. You know, I mean, Brett and his team are going to focus on certain things, and I'm going to focus on other things, whether they be big picture or small details. It's like, there'll be some details that I'll overlook that you'll see, and vice versa, or big picture things that, you know, we look at things a little different. So, you know, in my experience, like other firms I've worked at, other people I've worked with want to kind of do everything, but I think this collaborative process is so much better for us and the ultimate product. And so it's really fun to like just kind of bounce ideas off each other, especially because I have a small firm kind of like Brett too, and you know, when you're the, you know, decision maker in a lot of things, it can be hard to, you know, you don't always get that collaboration with a bigger group. So to bring people in for specific projects really helps, and it's really fun to collaborate. I really welcome that. A lot of people don't want to collaborate. Maybe their egos are too big or something. They think they have all the answers, but we do not. And so we like to take input and hear different perspectives, and that's refreshing.
Yeah, the word maintenance comes up in my brain. I mean, designing it and then working with all of that and being able to maintain it from the board perspective.
Yep.
That gets to be, you know, how do we maintain this 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road? And fun.
Yeah, stewardship is something. Stewardship, maintenance. Stewardship may be a fancy word for maintenance, but we talk about that from the get-go. It's like you have to take care of this thing. It's a living thing. You know, you paint your bathroom green, it's going to stay green for a while, but like this thing is always changing throughout the seasons year to year. So right from the get-go, you say, here's the expectations, and it's going to take a couple years to get there, but then stewarding it and adapting to the changes that happen out there too. Having the eye to see that is key. So.
And prairie management and stewardship is separate from, not separate, but something that we talk about in all of our projects, but there's the whole slew of things, right? Your materiality choices of the pavement in the front plaza, the sidewalk leading down, you know, all of these things become that part of the conversation. Like you, especially with, I'm sure Tim Palmer is bouncing around, like everything needs maintained in some capacity. And it's really our job as good landscape architects and designers to guide the client into the best decision and walk them through maintenance up front. And so part of our effort does include cost estimates and discussing things like maintenance, because we know it's part of what you have to plan for. You sometimes see a lot of people, there's lots of ways to spend money. You can spend the same amount of money on good design or bad design. You spend the same, let's say the budget's $20,000. Well, I know some landscape architects that could spend $20,000 really quickly and you're not going to get a good product. But that's part of our role too, is to make sure you're wisely using your dollars and to walk you through those conversations up front. Sometimes it's also not about saving the biggest penny up front, but if you're going to design something that's going to require more maintenance over time, that's going to end up equaling out costs, then you're not helping your client. You're not being of service to your client. All right, one more question.
I was just going to make a comment to that, to the stewardship. I've been here since the year 2000. So I was there when this became a pipe dream for the prairie. And we were so foolish thinking, hey, what do you do with the prairie? You go out and plant it and you just walk away and it'll take care of itself. We learned very quickly that's not true.
Yep. That's a great story. I mean, it's the truth, and we're working with a living medium. We're working with nature. O.C. Simons, who was a counterpart to Jens Jensen, said that the landscape architects are the biggest dreamers of all the fine arts because we are imagining what something will be, how a tree will grow, what type of space we're creating. When you finish a building, it's done. You inhabit it. When you look at a piece of art, it hangs on the wall, you enjoy it. The landscape is a living, breathing thing that will require maintenance and will require stewardship.
But so does the building.
Yeah.
So does the
Yeah,
building,
that's
but in a
right.
different capacity. Thank you all very much. Magnitas.